Eldwick Primary School in Bradford will open tomorrow as planned after the summer break, but they're having to shift pupils around as several areas here and at nearby Crossflats Primary School in Bradford have been cleared for refurbishment. The saga of RAC, aerated concrete, which has a much shorter lifespan than conventional concrete and was used for decades in public buildings, became more political today, with a former top civil servant saying Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, turned down a school rebuilding programme boost that the Department for Education had asked for 2 years ago.
So the actual ask in the spending review in 2021 was to double the 100 to 200. That's what we thought was going to be practical in the first instance. I thought we'd get it, but the actual decision that the Chancellor took in 21 was to halve the size of the programme.
No, I think that is completely and utterly wrong. Actually, one of the first things I did as Chancellor in my first spending review in 2020 was to announce a new 10-year school rebuilding programme for 500 schools. Now, that equates to about 50 schools a year that will be refurbished or rebuilt.
The RAC crisis had triggered a direct attack on Rishi Sunak by a former civil servant, and the Prime Minister was rejecting it outright. Who's closer to the truth on this? Is it Jonathan Slater or the Prime Minister, the former Chancellor?
Well, it is the case that spending on school buildings has fallen both over the last 15 years or so from high levels that were there up to 2010. There have also been cuts in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's certainly the case that the amount that's being spent is well below not just the education departments, but also the National Audit Office's view of what needs to be spent.
Rishi Sunak met the Education Secretary and others this morning to chase progress on RAC. At the end of one TV interview, Gillian Keegan let her exasperation show.
I don't have all of that right now, but we will get a plan and every single one of them will be done.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick two-shot down. Is that all right? Just two moments for
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their arse and done nothing? No signs of that, no?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that's... I mean, the other way of seeing it is that RAC panels are really dangerous when they collapse.
Number 10 said Gillian Keegan's language was unacceptable, and Gillian Keegan was soon back in front of the cameras, apologising.
Gillian Keegan, you said that everyone else had sat on their arses, which suggests you think people hadn't been pulling their weight. Who were you talking about?
Well, I wasn't really talking about anyone in particular. It was an off-the-cuff remark after the news interview had finished, or apparently after it had finished. And I'd like to apologise for my choice language there. That was unnecessary. But it was an off-the-cuff remark, basically, you know, based on the interview. The interview had been pressing me quite hard, you know, why I hadn't solved this issue, which had been going on since 1994.
Instead of coming out today and saying, this is what we're going to do to fix the problem, which we have made a lot worse, you've got members of the Cabinet coming out trying to blame other people, trying to blame people within their own teams, and to say, essentially, put responsibility anywhere but on the government. That is not what Britain deserves.
The government emphasised many of the schools affected by RAC were able to remain open because only part of the school premises would be roped off. Some structural engineers worry the scale of RAC use in decades of building has still not been fully grasped.
If it's a predominantly low-rise building, it has a flat roof, and it was built between, say, 1960 and 1994, we should ensure that the building owners inspect that building to see whether there is RAC in it.
The audit probably needs to go wider.
I think it should.
Around 36 hospitals are known to have RAC present in their construction. One court in northwest London, built in the 1990s, was closed for repairs related to RAC. An inspection of the prisons estate is expected to continue throughout the autumn.
And Gary is with me now. So slightly rattled ministers. Is the government crumbling like a piece of dodgy concrete?
It's not the start to the new parliamentary season they would like. This is completely off-grid. And if you've got an issue like this dominating the news, the last thing you need is a Secretary of State going all Logan Roy and drawing even more attention to the issue. Great interest in what Gillian Keegan meant when she seemed to be blaming other arses and a suggestion that it was previous holders of her office. Some of her allies are saying no, it's the local education authorities, the trusts, the multi-school trusts, who she says have responsibility for the schools, but of course it's her department that has responsibility for the budget. And you can't do that much, even if you've got responsibility for the schools, if you haven't got your hands on the budget. So one of the great problems with all of this is it's got cut through as an issue. A bit of sweariness gives it even more cut through. But the fundamental thing is that people can understand roofs falling down. I mean, it's got an incredible cut through. And Rishi Sunak today, thanks to a former civil servant, finds his own name linked to these roofs falling down. He's done his best to try and push back on that, saying that he raised spending as Chancellor. He raised it from a 10-year low, and he raised it to nothing like many people thought it needed to be given this crisis, which of course was identified quite some time ago.
OK, thanks for now. We'll be back with more from you shortly. But a little while ago, I spoke to the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb. Here's what he had to say. Nick Gibb, Gillian Keegan's let the cat out of the bag, hasn't she? I mean, you all think you've done a great job. Thousands of kids can't go to school and you want to be thanked for it.
She wasn't referring to herself, she was referring to the hundreds of civil servants who've been working really hard since 2018 to deal with this issue, and particularly since March 2022, when we sent out surveys to all the responsible bodies who are responsible for the 22,000 school buildings and the 65,000 buildings within those schools, to make sure we don't have RAC in those schools. But
it's an attitude that will go down very badly with parents who think, well, you made a total mess of our kids' school term and you want us to thank you for it.
She wasn't referring to herself. Look,
well, it doesn't matter. I mean, whether it was herself or the department. Well, I mean, it's the government.
It was a private, off-the-cuff remark, and she has apologised for her use of language. What she was...
So what you say privately is different to what you say publicly?
Well, what she was expressing was that we have been very proactive in dealing with this RAC issue. There are 156 schools where we've identified RAC. We had some evidence over the summer. We took very swift action. Civil servants have been working incredibly hard.
Not that swift. I mean, you know, there was a collapse in 2017. There was another in 2018.
And we issued guidance and warning notices to all responsible bodies.
But why didn't you say survey the schools then?
Because at that point, the evidence and the advice was that if you monitor and identify the RAC, but monitor it carefully, that is the right thing to do at that point. Now, as the
so it was somebody else's fault. It was an advisor's fault.
We have to take advice from the experts in RAC, the Institution of Structural Engineers and other experts. But that was the advice at that point. As evidence emerged, we updated the advice. And then in March 2022, we sent questionnaires to all responsible bodies responsible for our school buildings, asking them to let us know if they had RAC in their buildings.
But why hadn't you been asking them about RAC up until that point? I mean, you've been doing these annual school condition surveys and RAC had been left off it up until 2022.
But that's based on the advice that we get from...
Well, the advice was don't ask.
No, those surveys, and by the way, there's never been any surveys done by previous government, and we're on to our third. They are visual surveys of the condition of our school buildings, so we can focus the capital we have on repairing the schools in the worst condition. And that's what we've been doing at 50 schools a year, right back to 2012.
It's been reported today that there are 450 schools that are known to have RAC which are awaiting survey. Is that correct?
Yes, there will be. I can't confirm the actual number, but there are some
in that ballpark.
There are some. Well, I can't confirm the number, but what I can say is that
because you don't know, or you don't want us to tell us?
No, because the number changes all the time. And what we do is these questionnaires come back. And the vast majority say there's no RAC. Where they suspect there's RAC, we send in surveyors, and we'll be sending those surveyors in within a week. And in the vast majority, again, of cases where we do that, they don't find
But
RAC.
are kids going to those schools?
Yes.
Will they be going to those schools that haven't been surveyed yet? So they might be going to dangerous schools?
No, because the responsible bodies for those schools, they've had advice since 2018, which they take on board, which is about monitoring and identifying RAC in all those schools.
Yes, but the advice has changed, as you just said. You're now saying that there are hundreds of schools that have got RAC in, that are about to have urgent surveys, and children will be still going to those schools, and even though the roof could collapse.
No, well, we are being very abundantly cautious. We're more cautious than anywhere else in the world.
That doesn't sound very cautious to me.
It is very cautious, and those responsible bodies...
Sending children into a classroom that could collapse? That's not cautious.
No, it is cautious because in the vast majority of those cases, there will be no RAC. We are just being extra cautious in sending in surveyors to schools that suspect they have RAC. They are monitoring the position anyway, so they are monitoring the condition of that RAC the whole time to make sure that it is safe. And where they are worried, then they will take those particular rooms out of use.
So it's not right when Rishi Sunak says this is just about 100 schools, because it could be hundreds.
Well, it's 156 schools right now out of 22,000.
Could be a lot more.
It could be some more, but it's about 1% of surveys that we send out. And we only said, by the way, half of schools were built outside the period of RAAC, either before the 1950s or in this century, and they will not be affected by RAAC.
But it's clear you think you have done your job. So who is this, in Gillian Keegan's words, who's been sitting around on their arse?
So what she was frustrated about was that two things. One, that the civil servants have really worked extremely hard in being proactive and being extra.
But who has been sitting around on their arse?
The other frustration is that, as I said, we've had 95%, since March 2022, we've had about 95% of responsible bodies sending back the questionnaires. We want it to be 100%. We've chased several times.
So it's the head teachers, is it?
No, it's not head teachers, it's the responsible bodies. So it's either the local authorities, if it's a local authority school, it's a trust, if it's an academy, or it's a diocese, if it's a Church of England school. And vast majority, 95%, have sent back the questionnaires.
She sounded quite annoyed with them.
Yes, she is annoyed. We've chased several times. We want everyone back. We are being so cautious on this. Right back.
You keep saying that, but I mean, as we've now established, there are children going to school in the next few days that have not been surveyed, where they suspect there is RAAC and the roof could fall in. That is not cautious by any measure.
Well, the surveyors will be in within a week, and secondly, the head teachers and the responsible bodies know where the RAAC is in those buildings, and they have been instructed through our guidance about how to monitor the quality of that RAAC.
And what about those?
Safe.
I mean, I met a teacher this weekend. She's waiting for 17 porta cabins. It might take 3 months to arrive. So there are going to be kids for the whole of this term who were schooling from home. I mean, that's an appalling situation.
No, that's not happening. That's not happening. So I don't know what the cases you're talking about, but there are 52 cases that have been identified some months ago or earlier in the year where mitigations are happening and alternative accommodation is being found, not always in porta cabins.
So can you guarantee that there will be no schools in which students are not able to get into the classroom this term?
Well, that's a separate issue from the one you made.
Well, I'm talking about potentially a whole term of not being able to go to school.
It won't be a whole term. There may be some. Don't forget, RAAC is not pervasive throughout the schools that we've identified. It might just be in one room or just a sports hall or something. So you can bring in props. There are all kinds of ways. So it won't necessarily affect large numbers of pupils in a particular school. There will be some schools where the RAAC is very pervasive, in which case we do have to close the school and the children moved into alternative accommodation. And there may be some short number of days when the children are at home learning from home. But on average, the 52 schools that have already had these measures put in, it's about 6 days on average that the children were out of school. We want to do everything we can to get children back into face-to-face education as soon as possible, either in emergency alternative accommodation or in something slightly longer term, such as porta cabins, in some small number of cases.
Nick Gibb, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Say nothing.
I've learned.
Well, the government says they will release a list of all the affected schools later this week. But we found a total of 15 schools in England and Wales have been forced to close with no immediate plans to reopen. 29 schools have delayed reopening from the summer break due to safety concerns. 13 schools are partially closed and 55 schools in England and Scotland remain open but could have major disruption to learning. Anya Pop has been to Honeywood School in Essex, which has had to close around half the school after they found RAAC in the ceilings.
All the preparations for the return of children are being rapidly unpicked at this secondary school near Colchester.
Right.
On Thursday evening, they received the dreaded call that they couldn't reopen as planned tomorrow.
To give you an idea of the magnitude of the problem, all of those are out of action, this whole area in black that I've hatched out.
Now they're having to move everything out of classrooms that will soon be out of bounds, because part of the building contains the crumbling concrete known as RAAC.
Yeah, that's the whole of that L-shaped block out of action. And then we've got the same picture upstairs. Actually, it's even more extent upstairs.
It's a big area, isn't it?
Yeah. Half.
Wow.
Yeah, after you. This is our English corridor, and then it goes into computer science as well, and we've got media studies here. You can see some water damage. This isn't RAAC itself, these are just our regular ceiling tiles, so the RAAC would be in the ceiling above that, but where water damage has come, it's obviously come through the RAAC, as you can kind of see where that water damage is. Our report that we had a mixture of red, which is high, and orange, which is medium, just in these blocks. Everywhere else was green, but like I say, these blocks are the kind of the main part of the school.
Honeywood School is one of over 100 which are now having to find alternative spaces to teach in. The list of the others affected is yet to be published, but a local MP suggested it was here in Essex that's been most impacted by RAC school closures.
It's just a regular school, yeah, regular school building. Yeah, it's got bits that need a little bit more work than others, but it doesn't look like there's a hidden menace. But there is a hidden menace, yeah. But as we walk around, we're unlikely to see that menace really, unless we probe and have a look and go, well, you know, there's the rack there. But even looking at it, it doesn't look like anything bad's going to happen. But
you just don't know.
You don't know, and you know, it's everywhere, so we can't use the area. Here we've got one of our English classrooms.
Head teacher James Saunders has had to deliver the news to parents that the children would have to go back to a mixture of home and school learning until they can find more space.
These are all the iPads. There's 800 here ready to go to the children, so they'll be crucial for the online learning.
Obviously this is meant to be the first week of reopening. How disruptive will this be?
It's incredibly disruptive. You can see walking around behind me, teachers are literally evacuating all the stuff that they need out of their classrooms.
Do you feel supported by the DfE in trying to sort all of this out?
I do feel that financially. I feel that they've made a commitment to pay for anything that needs to happen. So I've got the confidence to go out there and do the things that we need to do. I find it sometimes a little slow because you're not put in front of a decision maker, and that's what you need when you say, this is the thing I've got, can you help, can you do this?
And until things go back to normal capacity, year groups will do half of their time in school and the rest at home. James can't say for sure how long it will take, and if the pandemic has taught him anything, prepare for the worst. Anything else is a bonus.
And your pop reporting. So what is the scale of the problem around the UK? We'll hear from Scotland in a moment, but first, 2 schools in North Wales have been closed over concerns about concrete. Let's go over to our Home Affairs correspondent, Andy Davis in Cardiff. Andy.
Jackie, it's not clear precisely how long these 2 secondary schools on Anosmore and Anglesey will remain closed for, nor what particular arrangements are in place now for the 2,000 or so affected students. That's still being worked out. What prompted these sudden closures? Well, that's information the Welsh Government says that it received from the UK Government yesterday evening regarding the new safety concerns which were raised over the summer regarding RAC in schools in England. And that's information which, as you're about to hear, the Welsh Government claims it should have received a lot sooner.
Well, as I say, the information came in very late yesterday, and this is information which the UK Government has had for some time. And hadn't been mentioned during the meetings we'd had with them over the summer, unfortunately.
But you have you have this information now, this evidence, as you put it in your statement. What exactly is that new evidence? And shouldn't it be put in the public domain now?
Well, it's the UK Government's document, and it's essentially a set of case studies showing what's happened in other contexts in England. So it's based on their experience.
And what is the problem?
Well, it relates to how the plank of concrete connects with the structure of the school. But I think it's really important that we're able to share this information as government so that each government can draw on the best available experience. That's why it's been so disappointing that, you know, this has been in the hands of the UK government for many, many weeks at the very least, and it was only provided to us last night.
Well, the UK Government in response has told us that it's been discussing concerns over RAC with the Welsh Government dating back several years, that when new information emerged this summer, shared it with officials and again in a meeting with Welsh officials on Friday. But it has yet to address the minister's claim that certain evidence was withheld from them here in Cardiff until 6:57 p.m. yesterday evening. More broadly across Wales, a major incident was declared at Withybush Hospital in Haverfordwest recently after RAC had been located in a part of the hospital there, forcing the closure of 3 wards. That appears to have had the most significant impact in Wales to date. As for the 2 schools which have been closed, the Welsh Government say that it understands that they are the only schools in Wales currently which have RAC in them. But can't be completely sure on that, concedes that there may be other schools out there with RAC, as some surveys are still ongoing. And given the long history of warnings on this, dating back years, it does raise serious questions for the Labour government here and some local authorities in Wales as to why that process hasn't been fully completed yet.
Andy, thanks very much. Andy in Cardiff there. Now, Scotland's First Minister has told parents there's no need for alarm after RAC was confirmed in 35 schools there. So let's go over to Holyrood and our Scotland correspondent, Catherine Sampson. Catherine, what more do we know about the situation there?
Well, Jackie, the Scottish Parliament also returns from recess this week, and we can expect this to be an issue that Humza Yousaf comes under sustained pressure over. And that's because it's an issue he's known about for months. It was first highlighted by the Scottish Liberal Democrats back in May. When I spoke to them earlier, they told me they believe the First Minister is now playing catch up on this because of the spotlight that's been shone on it elsewhere in the UK. Now, no school in Scotland that's been identified as having RAC is currently closed. That's an approach that Gillian Keegan described this afternoon as worrying. But the First Minister has spent the day really moving to try and reassure parents and pupils who, of course, in Scotland have been going back into classrooms for weeks now, they are safe.
There's no immediate risk to staff or indeed pupils. Of course, we'll continue to monitor the sites that do have RAC, but we know, for example, appropriate mitigations are being put in place. One local authority telling us in government that, for example, RAC was in one of the boiler rooms, so they took appropriate mitigation in order to secure that particular room. So, look, parents shouldn't worry. I know, as a parent myself who's got children in school, when you see what's happening down south in England, there may be some concern, but there's no need for alarm. It is a serious situation, but it's one that both the national government and local government are working closely together on.
Now, for some teaching unions we've been speaking to today, these reassurances are too vague. They've been pushing for surveys. We have been told a review of concrete in schools and other public sector buildings is underway, but it's going to take months to complete. There are calls for Scotland's Education Secretary to meet with education leaders this week to discuss, among other things, calls for a government fund for any remedial work to be carried out. There are calls for greater clarity on exactly what checks have been carried out in what schools, and also calls to check on whether, given some of the situations in England, if there have been checks, do those checks now need to be revisited?